Hello, Nicole. Thank you for inviting us into your home. Now, you are the costume designer for PSF.
Yes.
So is that your profession?
Yes, I trained at a college in Liverpool for 3 years to cut period costumes, and then I worked at Cosprop in London, which is quite a big costume house, and then I've been freelance for the last 35 years, working in theatre, film, opera, ballet. I've done a bit of supervising, I've done a bit of teaching, I do a bit of designing, but what I mainly do is cut, and that means I take a drawing, or it might be some reference from a book or a painting, and then I take a set of measurements, a bit like this. I either take the measurements or I'm sent them, and then I have to create that picture into 3 dimensions on that person and allow that actor to do whatever they have to do in it. Sometimes they might just be wafting around the stage. Sometimes they might have to run, jump on a horse and gallop away. Sometimes they might have to climb out of a window. And particularly if it's period costumes are quite restrictive. So I might have to put a little bit of stretch in somewhere or cut it very slightly differently. To allow them to do that. And when I do a costume fitting, I always ask them, what do you have to do in this? I always make them sit down. I did once pin a pencil skirt in incredibly tight on an actress, and then found she was doing the entire scene sitting in an interview and she couldn't actually sit down in it. So, you have to sort of find out what they're doing.
So, what are the main differences then between making costumes, say, for film and theatre?
Well, so in theatre, you are generally seeing a costume in its entirety. Unless you're in the tiniest studio theatre, but most of the time you can always see the costume, and you're usually viewing it from a distance. So the detail that you put on a costume for theatre, you have to think differently about, because it has to be, doing a tiny little embroidery stitch is never going to be seen. So you do something that's a little bit bolder, a little bit, more easy to see. In film, the camera can be right here. So from the waist up, and certainly from the chest up, everything needs to be absolutely spot on, because when it's up on a cinema screen, it's going to be much larger than life. So anything that's wrong is really going to be seen. In theatre, particularly if it's musical theatre, like a West End musical, there are 3 covers. So there's an actor, and then there are 3 understudies, and we have to make costumes for all those 3, so we have to make it 4 times. In film, we might have to make it 10 times, 15 times, 20 times. So for instance, in the Pirates of the Caribbean, I worked on all of those films, and the pirates, the speaking pirates, had to have 7 of everything. So 7 shirts, 7 breeches, 7 waistcoats, 7 coats, 7 hats, 7 everything. They were all aged the same, so they looked the same, but because they were wearing them throughout the film, and they were getting wet, they were in the sea, they had to be able to change. Sometimes aging and distressing takes on a more gradual form. So sometimes you're making 10 outfits which are aged from brand new down to decrepit, and that's because of the journey that actor's taking in that particular film. In theatre, you have quick changes, because it all has to appear in front of the audience, and you have transformations. So you often have to rig costumes, you do a lot of underdressing where you wear one costume over another so that one can be taken off very quickly. But it all has to be done there and then. Obviously with film, you have film magic. You have a lot of that done in the editor's studio afterwards. But what we do have to do is make for stunt doubles. So sometimes a stunt double will nearly always be wearing padding, and quite often a flying harness, which has great big metal, bits and pieces, and has to have holes for wires. So you have to make that costume so it looks like the one the actor's wearing, but actually it has to be, able to go over all these tricks and bits and pieces. Then there's sometimes things like blue screen and green screen. On a movie I did years ago in the 90s, Death Becomes Her, Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn, Isabella Rossellini, Meryl's head has to turn round in the film. It's a black comedy, so there was a lot of special effects for that, so the costumes had to accommodate some of this strange neck stuff. And then Goldie Hawn gets a cannon fired through her, and she then does the rest of the scene so that you can actually see a hole in her and the background is behind her. So when I was making her tops, I think we had to make 15 of them, and the special effects department gave me these rubber circles which had to be stitched front and back in exactly the same place, so that they were either blue or green, I can't remember what screen they were doing, so that in the editing they could flick it and you'd see the background behind her.
So that all sounds a very long way from a bit of a field and a marquee not very far from here, in Petersfield, called PSF. So what exactly does being costume designer for PSF entail?
So PSF is wonderful. I mean, it's just, it's so fast and furious, and I have an amazing dream team. So I have Eve Oakley and Eleanor Bansick, who we call ourselves the dream team. I don't know if anybody else does, but they are so hardworking, and we have to get stuff together very, very fast. So I think it's something like 10 days from the time that the cast arrive to opening night. So I try and get as much done ahead of time, and obviously there's conversations with the director. Last year we did Comedy of Errors, and Becky Hope Palmer directed it. So we had lots of conversations. She wanted it set in a sort of seaside port, and she wanted it sort of vaguely 18th century, 1700s, but she also wanted it to start modern, and the actors were at the picnic with everybody else watching, and then as they came on they put on pieces of 18th century gear, and then they used their modern dress. We had people in jeans that then rolled them up so they looked like breeches, and I chose yellow and blue as the colour scheme. It was popular in the 18th century, and also it's a lovely sort of seaside feel. We use lots of stripes, metal buttons to give a nautical look. We made most of the 18th century clothing on Comedy of Errors, but we also borrowed some from Joe at Beadell's costume store, who's always very helpful, and there's always little treasures lurking in the back rooms that are fun, lots of hats and proppy stuff.
In percentage terms, what's the difference between how much do you think you make and how much do you hire in or borrow?
It does depend. On Henry V we rented a lot more because we needed so many uniforms, and it was impossible to make them and to buy them. On Hamlet, I think there was a mix of the two. I think we bought a lot on Hamlet because it was modern, but we did make quite a lot as well. So it just depends on what period it is.
And what about the challenges of being open air in rain, sun and whatever else nature throws at you?
Yes, so that does give us some interesting dilemmas at times. So once the show opens, Eve and Eleanor are amazing at setting up all the costumes. We have quick change stations under gazebos and in trees and in forests. They do everything with a little head torch. They are amazing. It's quite tough sometimes, running around with umbrellas trying to keep the costumes dry. And then that in itself causes problems because we have to get everything dry by the next day, sometimes by the next afternoon if it's a matinee. So I've had stuff hanging all around this room with heaters on in the middle of July to try and dry everything and dry the shoes in time for the next show.
So what do you think is the importance of costume in a production?
So I think that costume has to help tell the story, and I think sorry, that's my cat. I think for the audience, it can really be very helpful. Sometimes we can use colours, sometimes, just to help them know who is who, especially in Shakespeare. Costume has to help tell that story. But also, I think it has to help the actors to feel who they are. And actually, Chris, in Hamlet last year, you were Claudius, and I seem to remember you pretty much had the same. You had a grey suit, you had a white shirt, you had a couple of ties. But actually, we ended up with 3 white shirts. One of them was dyed a little bit grey for when you were the ghost, so that it wasn't bright white. And I remember that you started to wear these 3 shirts at different times, because like there was one scene where you've been up all night and you said, no, I don't want to wear that shirt, I want to wear this shirt because it's a bit more dishevelled and it's not quite as starch collar and it makes me feel like I've been up all night. And you also wanted quite a lot of different ties, because for you that helped. Yeah, this is a different day, I want to wear a different tie, I wouldn't have worn the tie I had on. And whether the audience noticed it or not, and I'm sure some perceptive members did, but even if they didn't, it was very important to you. And I think that, you know, costume has to help the actors.
Thank you very much indeed, Nicole, for inviting us to your immaculate and beautiful cutting room. Is it called? I don't know what it's called.
Yeah, workroom.
Workroom cutting room. And your cat is really, obviously, very impressed by the whole process.
Really, yeah, she's very excited by it all, as you can see. Both of them are usually here on my work table, keeping me company.
Thank you very much.